Hey everyone, these notes are going to cover March 17, Tuesday, and March 18, Wednesday. So the last thing that we talked about last week was that the United States had decided to go to war. Remember, we had that Zimmerman note, the note that was sent from Germany to Mexico trying to convince Mexico to join the war, and that Germany would promise that Mexico would get back Arizona, New Mexico, Texas from the U.S. So the U.S. decided that we needed to go to war, but in order to do that first, they have to get some more support. So we're going to give you a little more historical context, which starts here. I want you guys to read along with me. So by 1917, the war in Europe had already been waged for 2.5 years. The bloody conflict was one of the most murderous events in human history, wiping out an entire generation of young men. The United States did not have any direct involvement in the war until 1917, because the conflict was mostly centered around conflicts over imperialism, nationalism, and alliances amongst European nations. There was not popular support for the war amongst Americans, who didn't understand why the U.S. would get involved in a war over there. Additionally, until World War I, the U.S. largely had an isolationist policy regarding foreign conflict. As a result, in order to engage in conflict meant that the U.S. had to build up an army and drastically start to alter the economy to produce materials for the army. The war would have far-reaching consequences. While President Wilson was certain it was time for the U.S. to enter the war by early 1917, he still had to have congressional approval. So on April 2, 1917, President Woodrow Wilson went before a joint session of Congress to seek a declaration of war against Germany in order that the world might be made safe for democracy. So on your note, it asks you, according to the U.S. Constitution, which part of the federal government has the authority to declare war? And you might think it's sometimes the president, but it's actually not. It's actually Congress. So that's why President Woodrow Wilson in 1917 had to talk to Congress. He had to ask them to declare war. So that's the answer to the second question. Why is he making this speech? Who is his audience? Well, he says that they should go to war, and Congress is his audience. So knowing that the war is unpopular in the United States, there's a couple adjectives, and I'm wondering which one you think will best describe Wilson's speech from this list. Do you think his speech is going to be argumentative? Is it going to be persuasive? Is it going to be calming, or is it going to be excited? Argumentative means, is he going to be arguing something? Persuasive means, is he going to be trying to convince Congress of something? Calming means, is he going to try and make things calm? And excited means, is he really going to try and get a excitable reaction out of Congress? So I want you to pause my video, circle which one you think his speech is going to be, and explain why before we move on. Okay, so now we are looking at Woodrow Wilson's speech. It's titled, A World Safe for Democracy. It was given in 1917 to the 65th Congress. So it begins, well, first let's go down and look at some of the vocab, because that'll help us understand what he's talking about a little more. So the first vocab word you see is vindicate, all the way down here. So to vindicate means to liberate or to make something free. The next one is feasible. Feasible means practical. The next one is menace, and a menace is a danger or a threat. The next one is autocratic. Autocratic means a government where the ruler has absolute power. That's whether they're going to probably be talking about Germany. A quarrel is a clash or a feud. Impulse is an urge. Dynasties are empires or regimes. Steadfast means to be loyal or to be faithful. Vitals are like a body's internal organs. Dominion means government. And indemnities means security or a guarantee. Okay, so now that we've gone through those vocab words, let's go back to the beginning of his speech where he says, "Our object now is to vindicate, to make free the principles of peace and justice in the life of the world. Neutrality is no longer feasible or desirable where the peace of the world is involved and the freedom of its peoples. And the menace to that peace and freedom lies in the existence of autocratic governments, backed by organized force, which is controlled wholly by their will, not by the will of their people. We have seen the last of neutrality in such circumstances. We have no quarrel with the German people. We have no feeling toward them but one of sympathy and friendship. It was not upon their impulse that their government acted in entering this war. It was not with their previous knowledge or approval. It was a war determined upon as wars used to be determined upon in the old, unhappy days, when peoples were nowhere consulted by their rulers, and wars were provoked and waged in the interest of dynasties, or of little groups of ambitious men who were accustomed to use their fellow man as pawns and tools. A steadfast concert for peace can never be maintained except by a partnership of democratic nations. No autocratic government could be trusted to keep faith within it or observe its covenants. It must be a league of honor, a partnership of opinion. Only free peoples can hold their purpose and their honor steady to a common end and prefer the interests of mankind to any narrow interest of their own. The world must be made safe for democracy. Its peace must be planted upon the tested foundations of political liberty. We have no selfish ends to serve. We desire no conquest, no dominion. We seek no indemnities for ourselves, no material compensation. For these sacrifices we shall freely make. We are but one of the champions of the rights of mankind. We shall be satisfied when those rights have been made as secure as the faith and the freedom of nations can make them." I think it's a pretty good speech. So, if we're looking back at your notes, it says, according to President Wilson, what is the goal of the U.S. when entering World War I? And then it's asking you to cite some evidence from the text to support your claim. So pause the video, see if you can go back and see if you can find some evidence that says what is the goal of the U.S. when entering World War I. And he says the world must be made safe for democracy. That's what he says the goal of the U.S. will be. So then your next question asks, what specific historical events do you think Wilson is referring to when he says, here's a long quote from him, he says, "Neutrality is no longer feasible or desirable where the peace of the world is involved, and the freedom of its peoples, and the menace to that peace and freedom lies in the existence of autocratic governments backed by organized force, which is controlled wholly by their will, not by their people." What do you think he's talking about when he says that? Pause the video and try and think about that. And what he's talking about is being occupied by another country. Just like when we were a colony of Great Britain in the 1700s. He says we can't just stand by and watch when this is the kind of thing that's going on. Just like we couldn't stand by anymore when we were a colony. We had to stand up and fight and do something about it. So then the next question in your notes asks, according to President Wilson, who caused World War I? Was it the German people or the German government? Go back, pause my video, and see if you can find something that says, is it the German people or is it the German government? And he says it's the German government. He says we have no quarrels with the German people. They didn't do anything. It's their government that's making all of these decisions. Here's this quote: "We have no quarrel with the German people. We have no feeling toward them but one of sympathy and friendship. It was not upon their impulse that their government acted in entering this war." So then your next question asks, whose responsibility is it to maintain peace, according to Wilson? Whose responsibility is it to maintain peace? He says it's a partnership of democratic nations. So it's people coming together, people voting on a decision, making sure that everybody agrees on a decision. And my next question for you is, do you agree with him? Is it a shared responsibility? Why or why not? Should a lot of people decide, or should it only be up to a small group? Pause the video and see if you can think about it. So question 9 in your notes is asking, what is President Wilson implying when he says the world must be made safe for democracy? What do you think? Well, many countries in the world are being threatened. So in order for them to have a say, have a voice, maybe he thinks that they need to be protected, or somebody needs to stand up and fight for them. They should be free to be democratic, to vote, and to have freedom. And the 10th question on your notes is saying, what feelings do you think President Wilson is trying to inspire amongst the congressional leaders with this speech? So what is he trying to get them to feel? Pause the video and look back at the speech and see if you can find, what is he trying to get them to feel? I think he's probably trying to get them to feel sympathy for those other countries, sympathy for the German people. He's trying to make them feel concerned, like this is an important issue, and that it's an urgent issue. It needs to be dealt with soon. Alright, the last thing that you need to do is you need to imagine you're a member of U.S. Congress. You're a member of U.S. Congress in 1917, and you just voted to join World War I. You heard President Wilson's speech, and as a result of your vote, you might get some angry letters from your constituents, the people that voted for you in your state, and they might not agree with your decision to vote in favor of the U.S. entering World War I. So how are you going to respond to this letter? What are you going to say? How can you use parts of President Wilson's speech to respond to your constituents' concerns? So if somebody sends you an angry letter that says, why are we joining in this fight? It's not our fight. We shouldn't be involved. What are you going to say to them? So what you need to do is you need to write a letter to your people, your congressional district, and you need to explain why you voted in favor of the U.S. entering World War I. And your letter should follow the following guidelines. You need at least 2 quotes from Wilson's speech above to support your claims and arguments in favor of the war. So you need to choose 2 things from Wilson's speech that you can say to other people and say, these are definitely the reasons that we need to join this fight, that we should be involved in World War I. And once you've done that, then you've finished your notes, and we will pick up again on Thursday.